Alright everyone, it's time to start off talking today about the concept of annexing Canada, Andrew Jackson, the War of 1812 in general, and associated topics. This is a fascinating topic. I've noticed, if you look through like history course books and stuff, you see a lot about like the US Civil War, certainly the Revolution, World War II, Vietnam is covered fairly heavily. But then there are wars that sort of slip through the cracks, and the War of 1812 along with Korea, the Spanish-American War, they just don't get the same treatment as some of these other instances of combat and diplomatic intrigue in US history. So first, an address to my Canadian clankers. Nobody is seriously conceiving of annexing you. While it would be funny, and while it would probably be economically very good for people on both sides of the border, Donald Trump, when he talks about annexing Canada, or he calls Justin Trudeau the governor of the 51st state or something, that's just, he's just joking basically. He's joking about tariffs more than anything else. The idea is we're going to tariff Canada if it doesn't involve itself with equal trade with us, and if they can't pay the tariff, then we just annex them or something like that. It's meant as a joke. It's meant as a form of humor. Trudeau is a cuck. Most Canadians, I think, know this, so I think I'm preaching to the choir on this one. But some Canadians got a hyper-patriotic sense in them over the last few days because Donald Trump, Orange Man bad. And so they're talking about, well, remember when we burned the White House and stuff like that. So let me talk briefly about the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson specifically, and again, associated topics. When the War of 1812 broke out, it was predominantly a US and British problem. Now, Canada, of course, owned at the time by the British. Now it's part of the Commonwealth, but it's a sovereign nation. But back then was British territory. And the British wouldn't stop harassing US sailors. Mostly it was because of the fact that they were stealing people off ships, shanghaiing them effectively, and forcing them to work on British vessels. Now, if you've ever studied anything, and I love history, so if you've ever studied anything about maritime history, you would know most people have it absolutely backwards. They think that, like, the pirates were all uncouth and unwashed and fucked up, and their captains were dictatorial, and that things on, like, for instance, British vessels, they were very astute, and the captain was a good gentlemanly lad. No, that's not the way that it worked. It was exactly the opposite. If you were on a British vessel, the reason why they were stealing off US sailors is because no British person in their right mind wanted to work on a British vessel. You were lucky if you got a couple meals a day of hardtack and gruel. Occasionally you were lucky if you got salt pork. Maybe you even got grog. Most of the time you probably just had dysentery. The conditions were miserable, and the British captains were known as fairly tyrannical, generally. With exceptions. I mean, not every captain's going to be an asshole, but for the most part, if you're on a vessel in the middle of the ocean, you got to understand, the person in charge, if they've got the guns behind them, so to speak, if they weren't absolutely fucking out of their gourd, and then got remanded effectively and locked in their quarters, they were effectively a dictator. And so American sailors did not want to work on British vessels. Number one, they're not British, and number two, the conditions were absolutely goddamn abysmal. The pirates were the ones that had a primitive form of democracy, actually. Little known fact, pirate captains, generally speaking, they operated under a sort of constitutional system on their ships, and they were only really in charge of, they had better quarters, they got more of a share, and in battle, they were the dictator. Otherwise, they were basically just a goddamn member of the crew. Most people think of like Blackbeard or Long John Silver, and they think that it was the pirates that were scruffy. No, it was the regulars that were scruffy, actually, at that time. Let's get past that for a moment. So the British are stealing off US sailors, running trade embargoes, blockading ports and stuff like that, completely abusing the young United States. And so the US decided to declare war. We tried to go into Canada several times and failed. That was not because of generally Canadian troops. Generally, it was due to British regulars. They proceeded to attempt to burn Washington, D.C. to the ground. It didn't work. It didn't work because of a freak event of nature. Some people say tornado. I personally believe it was some sort of microburst. So a severe atmospheric effect. They lay torch to the city. A bunch of rain starts coming down within an hour. And several British soldiers actually died in this endeavor. There's one British report where they said that cannons were literally being lifted off the ground. I don't know if I necessarily believe that, but we know that there was quite a bit of damage, but it did douse the flames, and the British withdrew. Subsequently enter Andrew Jackson, who actually fought the last battle of the war after the war had technically ended, the Battle of New Orleans. He was insane. He was known to be an extremely violent drunk, a big dude, big and brawny, dueled people all the time, that kind of person, the sort of person that you definitely don't want to piss off. He realized he didn't have enough militia in order to fight the British forces that were there. He didn't know that the war had ended, actually, at the end. Eventually got elected president, of course, Andrew Jackson. So he assembled a bunch of pirates and freed slaves to accompany the militia, and they beat the shit out of the British and completely crushed them, actually. Again, and then it ends with the Treaty of Ghent. By the way, afterwards, when he's president, he got gifted, apparently, and I believe this is actually true. This actually happened. He was gifted like a 200-pound cheese wheel or something like that. And eventually the cheese started to smell poorly in the White House. And apparently you can still smell it in the room that it was sitting in to this day. I believe that as well. I'd love to take a sniff in there because I'm a big fan of cheese. His wife started complaining about it. So he said, fuck, because apparently he wasn't a fan of cheese. You know, he couldn't eat it all because it's like fucking 200 pounds. So they started carving it up. And they invited all the poor people in D.C. to come and eat the cheese and stuff like that. That's basically the War of 1812 in a nutshell. By the way, Andrew Jackson apparently would get violently drunk with his friends in bars and pubs, and they would start throwing furniture around. Probably the sort of person that you want to be a general in such a battle. So yeah, to Canadians that are saying, well, we burned the White House, yes, but unsuccessfully. It appears to still be there, and there's a reason that it's not made out of flammable material anymore, I'm assuming. The march on D.C. was completely unsuccessful. In the end, the war ended in a draw, effectively, which is extremely impressive for the United States because our population was a lot lower. Our development index at the time would have been minuscule compared to what it is now, and the British were the most crack fighting force, especially on land, actually in the entire world at the time. British sort of got distracted with Napoleon there towards the end, so I think they were like, fuck it, basically. By the way, we also had the USS Constitution, and apparently British cannons couldn't even penetrate its hull, so naming it Old Ironsides for a reason. So just a little bit of a history lesson here. I thought I'd make both Canadians and U.S. citizens aware of some interesting facts about the War of 1812. Yes, you burned the White House. That's very impressive. Well, the British did, technically. But that doesn't mean anything. Nobody's actually trying to annex you, believe it or not. I would be in support of that. I think that it's a good idea. I have a feeling that a significant plurality of Canadians would think that it's a good idea as well. But Trump's he's joking about tariffs. He's making a meme. He's shitposting on Twitter, Elon Musk style. He's having fun. Don't worry too much. We realize that Canada's not a state and that Trudeau's not a governor. We're generally aware of this fact. Calm the fuck down. Nobody's marching in to annex you, although it would probably take less than a day. That's about all. Peace out.